Today's film is Trafic, and I would like to introduce the scenes, the initial scenes, the style, and the themes of the film so that you can understand this very unusual film. And I will ask you to write some notes after you watch at least the first part of the film. You can just watch at the beginning and then think of comments, brilliant ideas, observations. You don't have to describe what you're seeing. However, I didn't bring any of the forms that I usually use for this. So for the notes, I would invite you either to use your tablet, computer, or just take a piece of paper and write your name on top of it, the name of the film as well. Okay? This is a French film from 1971 by a famous actor and director who had had a long career starting in the 1930s, of course, mostly in theaters, and then during the post-war era, the 1940s, he did some shorts. The 1950s were the time of his big success because, as I mentioned on Tuesday, he got an Oscar in 1958 for the film Mon Uncle, My Uncle, which you can still find on streaming platform. And it's a very unusual take on modernity. There is this sequence where this older individual has to deal with the gadgets found in a modern house. Through the 1960s, the director and actor, his name is Jacques Tati, continued to work on TV, produce some films based on the prestigious prize that he had received for his film My Uncle. During the 1960s, he was able to present himself as a successful director to people who had money to invest in the production of other films. And in fact, that's when he tried his big budget film, which was Playtime. And he really went all in, building a big studio in order to film this film, which was supposed to be a satirical representation of urban lifestyle with a special focus on the modern office. And by modern office for the 1960s, the idea of the modern office was the cubicles, was modernist architecture, was symmetry, the extension of symmetry to the point where when you navigate a modern office building, you don't know where you are, which floor, which corner, because it's everywhere is just the same. He spent so much money trying to build entire offices, buildings, urban landscapes that, of course, he was never able to recover all the money for his investors from this film Playtime, which usually you can find on Canopy. If you're familiar with this platform, Canopy with a K is a platform where Stony Brook University students can stream films for free. And the last time I checked, Playtime was there. It's a very quirky film, unique, but I will recommend it. So by the end of the 1960s, even though Tati was loved by movie critics, by journalists, was being interviewed in England, in Italy, in the US, right? He was going around a lot. But the investors, those with the money, had lost faith in him. So when he planned this film that we're about to see, which was, he didn't know that, but was going to be his last feature-length film, there was very little money that he could find. So initially the film was planned as a TV film. So there were a bunch of TV stations that paid him because they would then broadcast the film. However, the film was indeed released in theaters. I saw it as a kid. I remember one summer I would go to the Tyrrhenian Sea with an aunt, and there would be movie theaters at night, every night, and they had not the usual programming, and I saw this film. It struck a chord with me. But in order to finish this film, he had so little money that by the end of the film, you know, when they were filming using traditional equipment, you had to pay by the meter for the actual film in the cameras. The cameras were being rented usually, so you had to pay by the day or by the week. By the end of the film, he didn't have money for film, money for cameras, other equipment. Luckily, there was a crew shooting a documentary. You know that a lot of films, let's put it in a different way, a lot of documentary makers attach themselves to an interesting film, to shoot the background, to shoot the set, what is going on, and have a small product they can place. They don't need to make much money because a documentary crew would be a handful of people, one or two cameras. So since there was this crew shooting a documentary on the film, at the end of the film, when Tati couldn't use the cameras he had rented and didn't have film, he borrowed their equipment to finish the film. And again, it was a moderate success in theaters, a big success with the critics, certainly one of the best films on automobiles ever made. And to put this in a context, 1970, 1971 were 2 years when a lot of films came out in Europe and in the US about automobiles. And it has to be understood by looking at a larger context. Remember that during the whole 1960s, the automobile was really driving the market, the commercial market, in a lot of economies. In the US, $1 out of $5 spent by consumers was being spent on automobiles, right? For consumer products. And I'm talking about houses or other stuff. But the culture of the automobile, the relevance it had gained in society were great. Technically, the automobile was about to reach its plateau. Technically, the big plateau happened during the 1980s or 90s. The 1970s were still, and 60s, late 60s and 70s were still a great time for technical development, and people were eager to see the new models. And of course, in a lot of countries, this was the apex also in terms of the numbers of circulating vehicles, right? More and more people could afford an automobile, right? Compared to the past. The change happened in many countries, certainly in my country of Italy, during the 1960s and 70s. So this week we're watching Trafic, and if need be, I can show the conclusion of the film next week. But the following week, I have another film from 1971, American film shot in France, produced by Steve McQueen, who was a big name, highly revered and highly paid American actor from that period, Mr. Cool for the 1960s and 70s, Le Mans. Steve McQueen transferred his whole production near the racetrack of Le Mans, where the 24-hour race happens every year in June, and spent the summer after the race. He started shooting during the race and then continued until September or October to make this incredible film about car racing. What these two films have in common, today's film, Trafic, and Le Mans, are the fact that following the major style of the period for artistic films, they're both visual films. That is to say, both in this film and the next, Le Mans, there are very few lines. In this film, sometimes you can read the captions. Of course, I'll put the captions on, but without the captions, you wouldn't be able to hear every word, because Tati had this naturalistic approach where he would shoot a scene with its noises, and sometimes conversation is noise in the background. He's not necessarily focusing on the conversation taking place between two actors in the corner of this room, which could be the factory where a car is being designed and produced. Conversations are part of the environment for him. So both this film and the next have very few lines. Their script is minimal. And for the next film, we know that Steve McQueen, who was working on the script with script writers, while the film was being shot, he didn't get to France with a finished script. We know that Steve McQueen would read the page for a day, or the 2 pages to shoot for the day, and then tear one up because he wanted less dialogue. He wanted to, they both, Tati and Steve McQueen, who was not the director, but who was the soul of that production, they both wanted to have a visual representation of mobility. When we look at cars, and cars are everywhere, what emotions, feelings, ideas are evoked by our interaction with the car? In the case of Trafic, there is a paradoxical representation of mobility. The paradox is, are we more mobile thanks to the vehicles that surround us, that occupy a lot of space, physical space and mental space in our lives? Have we gained mobility because of all these automobiles? And the paradoxical response is no. The more car we have, the less mobility we are afforded, because we have these urban settings full of automobiles that often are obstructing each other. They're not moving. Everywhere you see, there are people in front of a traffic light or people in a traffic jam, right? Which is still the reality for a lot of places. Certainly if you go to New York City on a Friday evening, that's the reality, right? If you go to the Long Island Expressway at 7:30 in the morning, that's the reality, right? You're going to New York, towards New York at a speed of a bicycle. So keep in mind this basic theme. Modern mobility equals less mobility. And to make this paradox visually understandable, Tati inserted in the story some references. Sometimes you see a TV set and people are watching the TV. What are they watching on TV? The moon landing. And what's the purpose of this narrative pattern? Because there are 3 or 4 times that we see the rockets and then the people on the moon. And some of the characters at the end will mimic the astronauts walking slowly on the moon. What is the other side of the paradox in reference to the moon? That we are so mobile that now, in this modern age, we can get from the Earth to the moon. However, our characters who are trying to go from Paris to Amsterdam will never get to Amsterdam in time. So, paradoxically, it's easier to get to the moon than to get to Amsterdam. At the beginning of the film, we see a factory where cars are being produced. Let me show you a few images with my commentary, and then we can switch to the film so that you have a better idea of the mood of the various scenes. From the very beginning, we see a factory. This is a true factory, right? A French factory where they went to shoot this film. And you see 2 things in this sequence. One is the big machines that are printing the body parts of the car, right? The doors, the sides of the cars, the various components that will come together in the finished product. So clearly, these machines are bigger than any human, and they're being serviced by human workers. And then you see the end result, right? Which is this immense parking lot full of automobiles. And what are the ideas that are being suggested just visually here? One, that humans have become appendices of the machines. That humans' existence has become is now subordinated to the machines. And what's the sense? What's the meaning of all of this? It's not clear. Because you have all these machines parked here. It's like a lake. It's like a sea of machines with characters like this one who are themselves wondering, what is this about? Right? Because everywhere you either see parked cars or cars on the streets, one after the other, that are almost immobile, stuck, stopped. So there are rituals, right? The assembly line is made of gestures. You have to repeat these gestures to accompany the production of the car parts. And work itself is made of rituals. Parking the cars, checking on them. Life is made of daily rituals connected to work, going to the office, doing things at the office. However, we have become, as modern humans, that's Tati's thesis for this film, we've become like machines. Our rituals are mechanical. We just repeat these rituals as if we are machines ourselves. And it's all about the repetition. It's all about the repetition of the physical gestures. We don't know why we're doing it. We don't feel the sense in this, the purpose, the sense of purpose, right? We just do it because we're part of an organization that works like a big machine. Of course, the main character played by Tati, you'll recognize him with his long coat, pants that are a bit short, you see socks and shoes, an umbrella, no matter what the weather is like. The character name is Hulot, Monsieur Hulot. The main character is the intruder, because the main character is someone who's not neurodivergent, someone who's not aligned with everyone else, who not only doesn't see any sense in life, but doesn't have enough common sense to just do whatever the others are doing. And even when he's just walking, he's walking in a different way. Everything he does is out of sync with the rest of the others. And as such, he becomes the enabler of the twists in the story. The twists are usually problems, issues. Some are mechanical issues because what's the core of the story, the storyline? Monsieur Hulot has designed an RV, a small RV vehicle for camping, full of gadgets, where you can sleep inside the vehicle, shower, prepare meals, have those meals. And they need to show this new vehicle at a car show in Amsterdam. However, the new vehicle needs an older vehicle to be taken there, which is paradoxical, like many of the other paradoxes in the film. So they put it in this old track, which will break down constantly, an old track that is to be cranked like a car from the early 20th century. And the track is breaking down. So the car show opens, they're not there. In their pavilion, in their section, the only thing they have to show is trees, because this is an RV, so they've made a fake wood. So they can show the people that there are trees, they have sounds of birds, but the vehicle is not there. The vehicle is en route. It should take only half a day to go from Paris to Amsterdam, a day at the most, depending on your speed. But they're constantly delaying their arrival, problem after problem. By the time they get to Amsterdam, the car show has closed. So the engineer has failed, and in fact, he'll be fired right then and there by the boss of the company. So, for the first part, keep in mind humans becoming like acting like machines, humans following rituals, and the theme is carried on in the second scene where we see the interior of the car show. This is supposed to be the place where the car show will take place. And they used the actual space, and you see bits and pieces of actual car show. And in here they have to mark the various sections where Ford cars will be, where Renault or Citroën cars will be. And they've placed very thin wires, right, to delimitate the various areas, and therefore they constantly have to skip over these wires. And again, they're like puppets. The idea is that maybe there is a sense to this, but if I look at this from the point of view of someone who's alien to reality, from someone who's neurodivergent, then I just see people doing funny steps, right? Walking funnily. And then we see Hulot in the street, and as I said, right away you see that he's not well synchronized with the rest. The way he walks through the traffic, the way he relates to the environment makes him immediately look different than anyone else. This is his workplace, and again, it's another workplace where everyone is busy, but we don't know what is being really achieved. A lot is of emphasis on communication, but what is being communicated? Very little, if nothing at all, right? There are people managing the phones in here, people on the phones in there, plus a variety of workers. Then they put the car on this track and they start their trip, their journey towards Amsterdam, and you see the highway. And you can see how Tati here used the documentary style. He actually went on the highway. These are not extras driving cars. This is the actual traffic leaving Paris. And the way he looks at traffic is like the same way you would look at fish in a tank, fish in a bowl. You have all these people by themselves, usually, in a car, and you look at them from the outside. And what's their life inside this cubicle, inside this cocoon that is the car? They're very lonely. They're engaged in various rituals. Of course, they might stick a finger in their nose or scratch themselves or look around. They stop for gas. They receive gifts because that was a popular thing. They stop at various rest stops for food. At some point, they have to go find gas. And once you leave the highway, what you see constantly is wreckage, old cars abandoned everywhere. Once again, we have an abundance of cars, but it's not immediately clear why and what's the sense of this, meaning what was added to our existence by this technology that occupies our streets and occupies the fields and the villages with their remains, right? Once they are old and not operational any longer. For the scene at the gas station where people receive these busts of famous French people, keep in mind that it was really a marketing obsession during the 1970s to give people who would fill their tank some kind of toy or gift or souvenir, usually made of plastic, but sometimes really big thing. Of course, this is an invention by the director, and then little by little you realize that the faces are almost the same. During one of their breakdowns, they have to visit a garage, and the garage itself doesn't show much real activity. And the people in the garage are almost like magical beings in a wood For example, this guy in the back that pops up in between cars, but you don't know what his existence is about. And this is one of the places where the people, instead of working, are watching the moon landing, which is a celebration of universal stellar mobility, while human mobility is actually hindered by technologies. This is their pavilion, the area that is waiting for the car, with fake trees, with the sounds of the birds. And people actually go there, even though there is no car. The spectators actually cross this space, but that's all they can show. That's another paradox. Their company for this car show can only show an empty space reproducing a forest.